Hello, welcome to the program. Montenegro is considered to be one of the frontrunners to join the European Union, and it hopes to enter the bloc and the eurozone in 2028. The Western Balkans country of around 620,000 people began accession talks in 2012. 6 years earlier, in 2006, it emerged as an independent state after the end of the former union of Serbia and Montenegro. Well, today we host the country's president, Jakov Milatović. He's a young pro-European reformer who says he's determined to follow the Euro-Atlantic path. He's an Oxford-trained economist and was Minister of Economic Development before being elected president of Montenegro in 2023. President Milatović, welcome to Talking Europe.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been visiting France. I want to ask you about whether you're getting enough support from the French president on your EU membership bid, because of course President Macron, he didn't back a proposal from the EU Council to streamline the accession process for new members. Was that a disappointing move by the French president?
I think, the role of France is crucial. And obviously, we are doing our best to strengthen the relationship between Montenegro and each and every member state of the EU, including with France, because ultimately, the decision about the new member states is not the decision of the European Commission, but a political decision of the member states in the EU Council. And, this is part of my job to basically very openly discuss about the challenges that Montenegro is still facing, but also about an enormous progress that Montenegro has made along our EU accession path.
We'll talk about that, but I think there's a perception here in France that President Macron can't really push the enlargement process the way he used to because he perhaps doesn't have the political capital, and that advocating for enlargement would be a gift to the populist parties and the far right in France. Do you have that sense as well or not?
I think that the moment in Europe, the sense about the enlargement has changed, especially following the Russian aggression on Ukraine in 2022, when was the moment when I believe the leaders of the EU understood that the enlargement is also about the security of the European continent. And I believe that the President Macron also understands this. If you remember, it was also France that back in 2019 proposed a new methodology, and rightly so. So now every single candidate for the membership also needs to make a substantial progress vis-a-vis the rule of law before progressing on some, other more technical things. And I believe that now the accession process has got both of these angles, both geopolitical one as well as sort of a more technical one with completing the chapters.
Of course, MEPs, members of the European Parliament, applauded Montenegro's accession process in June, but they said there has to be more, that more has to be done on judicial reforms and electoral reforms and anti-corruption efforts, the fight against organized crime. With all that in mind, do you think this 2028 target is realistic then, both for joining the EU and the eurozone? Because you want to join the eurozone as well, let's remember.
There are probably 5 key factors why Montenegro is perceived as the most advanced out of all the candidate countries. Number 1 is institutional advancement. So Montenegro is the only candidate country that has opened all the chapters, and we were also able to close a number of them by this specific moment of time. Number 2 reason is that Montenegro is fully aligning its foreign security policy with the one of the EU. So everything, literally everything that is decided by the EU Council, Montenegro takes on board. Montenegro is also part of NATO, and that's very important given the current geopolitical situation. You mentioned the eurozone. Montenegro has unilaterally adopted euro a while ago, and in that regard, we are also trying to fulfill all the necessary Maastricht criteria. Perhaps, the last but not the least, given the politics in the EU, Montenegro is the smallest of all the candidate countries. And in that regard, the entry of Montenegro would not change at all the way that the funds are being distributed within the EU. And that matters.
I want to come on to something when you were visiting with EU Council President Antonio Costa in mid-October. You talked about malign influence from third countries destabilizing your EU membership process. What sort of influence or disinformation are you encountering?
I mean, listen, when you zoom out a bit, the enlargement of the EU was always an investment in stability and prosperity, not only of the parts where the EU enlarged, but also of the Europe as a continent as a whole. Now I believe it's the same story with the Western Balkans. Obviously, if Europe doesn't, grasp this opportunity and take the moment, somebody else will try to increase its power in the region, and this is what we are already seeing through different hybrid threats, different disinformation that are coming from the third parties. And I was very clear. I do want to see more engaged Europe in the Balkans when it comes to this topic.
What kind of help do you want exactly?
Well, technical help, the way, that we can make our institutions within our system more resilient in order to be able to fight more effectively that kind of hybrid threat. But, in the long run, I think obviously we need to work a lot on the media literacy of especially our young people, as well as social cohesion. But Europe and the EU accession is by far the most common denominator, which is strengthening our social cohesion as well.
One issue that you face on this kind of pro-European direction is that you have a coalition where not everybody sees things the way you do when it comes to the EU. And I just want to quote something quickly that the US ambassador in Podgorica said. She said, "The participation in government of groups or leaders who refuse to stand up for Ukraine or who refuse to support EU sanctions against Russia drastically hinders Montenegro's efforts in realizing its European aspirations." Is that a fair comment?
I mean, we live in a democracy. The same, as you have in France, probably different opinions about different topics. But what is important is ultimately what is a state position. And the state position on the Russian aggression on Ukraine was very clear from the very day one, including by myself as the president, as well as our prime minister. So as a NATO country, as a country that basically is fully aligning our foreign security policy with the one of the EU, our position vis-à-vis Russia is exactly the same as the one that France has.
I want to ask you quickly about the pro-Serbian parties in Montenegro, because obviously they're advocating for closer ties between Montenegro and Serbia. You said when you were doing your election campaign that you were in favor of a rapprochement, but is that still realistic now, given that President Vučić is being accused of a crackdown on protesters and getting closer? He seems to be getting closer to China and Russia.
I mean, regional cooperation is just the other side of the coin of the EU accession. And for Montenegro, regional cooperation is the third key pillar of our foreign policy, together with the EU accession and the NATO membership. Montenegro is a touristic country, and we do pursue a policy of being a good neighbor. Obviously, Serbia is a major economic partner to Montenegro. It's a country with whom many of the people in Montenegro have very strong family relationship. So we do want to have the best possible relationship with Serbia, but also with every other country in the region. And, connecting that with our EU accession, in comparison perhaps, to the other countries of the region, Montenegro doesn't have any major open issue with its neighbors. So, in other words, we would not be bringing problems to the club.
I'm going to ask you also about the Western Balkans summit in London, where the question of organized crime and migration came up. Obviously, it was your Prime Minister who attended this, but let's take a quick listen to UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer talking about those issues.
The Western Balkans has long been a vital transit route for the criminal smuggling gangs. You don't want to see those gangs operating in your territory, and we all suffer the consequences of their action. So we have to take these gangs down, smash them, through proper, purposeful cooperation.
President, how much of a problem are you still having with these two particularly notorious drug cartels, which originated on the coast of Montenegro, the Kavač and the Škljari. Is this really a big obstacle on your EU path?
It's a challenge that we are tackling together with our international partners. And I believe that the French authorities played a crucial role there, together with Europol and Interpol, when they dismantled the so-called Sky encrypted correspondence between the members of the organized crime groups. And this is the evidence which now our prosecutorial system, our court system, is using to process many of those people, but also the people who were part of our system, of our police department, of our prosecution, of our court system, who instead of fighting the organized crime, were actually part of the organized crime. So absolutely, we are making a tremendous progress in that regard, obviously only with the support from the international partners. And I do want to put an emphasis. When I was chosen to become the president, I had a very clear mandate from the people to promote zero tolerance on organized crime and on corruption.
Montenegro suspended a visa-free regime for Turkish nationals after a weekend of violence triggered by the stabbing of a Montenegrin man in the capital, Podgorica, by a group of Turks. You've been critical of that decision to suspend the visa-free regime with Turkish nationals?
So I think that obviously immigration policy of Montenegro needs to be analyzed. At this stage in Montenegro, we have about 20% of the foreigners living in Montenegro because of different reasons. So there is a bit of a pressure that people of Montenegro are feeling, but that's not the reason to, without an analysis, impose a visa regime on Turkey. Turkey is currently...
So the government your own government was too hasty in making this decision?
I think that the government basically made the decision to impose visas without an adequate analysis.
We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for being my guest, President Jakov Milatović of Montenegro, and that's all for this edition of Talking Europe. Glad you could join us here on France 24.